Elites? No elites. Elites? No elites. Oh wait, was this supposed to be a boss at the end of this dungeon? Huh, I didn't notice. Ladies, gentlemen, and Haradrim of all ages, just over a week into the life cycle of Diablo 4, I have perfected the Bear Druid build. I've always been pretty aware of what the final version of this would look like, but I've been giving you the early level 50 version of it, one that you can easily bring up around level 60 as well for upgrades, even if you don't have the specific unique item that makes it particularly shine. But now it is time to go over this finalized version of the Pulverize build, the one that will likely remain unchanged at least until Season 1, so if you want to be a big, chunky bear capable of turning any enemy into paste just by smacking your cute little paws down on the ground hard enough, this is the build for you. As such, I'm calling this the Papa Bear Pulverize Druid. I considered calling it Goldilocks as it's just right, but Papa Bear sounds much nicer and more relevant, and well, it still references the concept. Here I of course showed you me just blitzing through content scaled around my level, but I've also got this nice clip of a tier 38 nightmare dungeon, which is level 92 enemies for those wondering, and I completed this at level 79. Sure, it isn't easy breezy, it was a little slow, a little bit methodical, but the point of this was to show that I could beat up a dungeon almost 15 levels higher than me and succeed at it with this build, even though my gear isn't perfect yet. I have all the right aspects and the right concepts going on, but my Paragon Board is literally 23 levels from complete, which is missing almost 100 Paragon points because that's how that maths out, and my gear doesn't have ideal affixes either. Point being, this is the build being shown conceptually in full, and it can succeed even with this much difference from what it would actually be when fully done. So imagine the same build at level 100. The idea of this build is simply, and I've talked about this loads in the past, essentially you turn Pulverize into an Earth skill, and you use the Earthen Might key passive that gives you a proc chance to fill your spirit bar and give you guaranteed crits for 5 seconds. You use Grizzly Rage with the legendary that makes it gain stacking crit damage the more times you crit during the duration. This is the simple 3-step combo that makes this build extremely strong. But in this finalized version, there's just so much more going on that every single piece of equipment brings to the table, so let's break down the entire thing. We will be starting off with the skill points, of course, going node by node. This is not the leveling version of this build though. We do have earlier versions of the build on the channel if you want one, but this one requires a certain unique and certain legendaries to function the way that it does, so I won't be going through the skills level by level, just cluster by cluster. After that, we'll tackle down the spirit boons, then our legendaries and uniques, as well as, of course, talking about the general affixes that you want to aim for to specifically make this stronger. Then what you want to do with your Paragon Board the whole way through. And finally, a bit of how to play and any tips that I've got for you while you're using this build. Starting off then, today we are taking Earth Spike as our basic skill. The main reason for this is that we have the unique helm, Vasily's Prayer. This makes all Earth skills count as werebear skills and also generate Fortify when you hit enemies with them. This is a ranged basic skill, and interestingly, this also lets the build function entirely as a ranged build too if you want it to, though it does lose some damage if you do that, obviously. We then take Enhanced Earth Spike for a 10% stun chance on hit for 2.5 seconds, then the enhancement over here depends on if you want to be tanky or if you want to deal more damage. In lower tier content, you can easily get away with Wild Earth Spike. This makes a second Earth Spike happen if you hit a stunned or immobilized enemy, and the second Earth Spike gives you a higher chance of proccing Earthen Might for the spirit refill and 5 seconds of crits, so that obviously results in more damage. Alternatively, if you're doing content that is even remotely challenging, I would definitely recommend using Fierce Earth Spike, which makes this skill give you a bunch of Fortify every time that you use it on a stunned, immobilized, or knocked back enemy. In the core skill node cluster, we'll be doing quite a lot. First up, of course, is going to be Pulverize. You want this at 5 ranks of the skills. It is our main source of damage by a mile, and also any ranks of the skill that you can get from gear make it even better, as having it overcapped on ranks just makes it deal way more damage. Then you want to take Enhanced Pulverize, which gives you a guaranteed overpower for every 12 seconds that you remain above 80% health, and Primal Pulverize, which makes enemies hit by Pulverize deal 20% reduced damage for 4 seconds. This build is exceptionally tanky, and this is one of the main reasons why. Getting this kind of damage reduction from your core skill is pretty nuts. Then for passives in this cluster, we grab 1 rank of Heart of the Wild. This gives you an extra 3 maximum spirit, which isn't massive, but it does let you get 3 ranks of Wild Impulses over here, which increases the cost of your core skills by 9%, but increases the damage of them by 15%, resulting in an overall damage boost, especially as a lot of what this build is made for is essentially one-shotting enemies from 100% health to dead. So doing more damage at the cost of higher spirit cost does fit exactly in with our goals. Then we take 3 ranks of the Predatory Instincts passive, which gives you 6% bonus crit chance on close enemies, which a lot of our enemies will be. Then 3 ranks of Iron Fur for for 9% damage reduction when we're in bear form. And, well, heads up, we will always be in bear form. Every skill in this build is based around that concept and will keep you in this form. With that, we move on to the defensive skills, and surprisingly, in a build this tanky, it's partially because we put a lot of points in here.
I don't believe you.
First up, then, you want Earthen Bulwark. This creates a lovely barrier for your health. Then, of course, Enhanced Bulwark to have it make you unstoppable as well for its entire duration, which is super important. Preserving Earthen Bulwark up here makes it also give you a bunch of Fortify when you cast the skill. This skill as a whole is super important for the build, as part of what makes this build so strong is that you have the Unstoppable buff active about 95% of the time, which makes you just completely immune to crowd control or debuffs of any kind, letting you just sort of walk around doing what you want to do and even ignoring mechanics at times. Then we take Debilitating Roar over here, putting 3 skill points into this to reduce the cooldown again, and again, any points from gear towards this skill are very good too for further cooldown reduction. What the skill does then is reduce the damage of all nearby enemies by 70% for 4 seconds. This doesn't just apply to you though, it also applies to anything near you, including companions or other players if you're playing group content, and it's really incredible for that. Then we take Enhanced Debilitating Roar, which makes it also give you a large amount of Fortify when you use it, and then we also take Preserving Debilitating Roar, which makes it heal you for 4% of your max health every second that the skill is active, again adding to our overall tankiness. Then we take 1 rank of Ancestral Fortitude, the passive, for 5% non-physical damage reduction, and then 3 ranks of Vigilance for 15% damage reduction for 6 seconds after casting a defensive skill. If you simply rotate between Earthen Bulwark and Debilitating Roar, you can actually keep this buff active about 80% of the time. After that, we completely ignore the Companion Node cluster, but we do put quite a bit into the Wrath cluster. You want to grab Trample over here as an active skill. This is a forward charge that will go wherever your cursor is on the screen, so you do have to pay attention how you aim it. You can also use this as a movement tool to cross large gaps quickly, especially on a diagonal angle where you can put the cursor further away from you. The skill also has Unstoppable on it for more ways to break CC. It does decent damage, and if you knock an enemy into a wall using this, it stuns them and does bonus damage too. The enhancement for this makes it deal just a nice chunk more damage, and then we also take Savage Trample, which has this skill give you 20 spirit on use. After that, we look into the passives, and we want 3 ranks of Crushing Earth over here, which boosts the damage that Earth skills do to crowd-controlled enemies by 15%. I've got 1 bonus rank from my amulet, which is just another 5% damage. Also take 3 ranks of the Stone Guard passive while you're here, which makes Earth skills do 12% more damage while you have Fortify for more than 50% of your maximum health. Past this, you also want 1 rank of Mending. This increases all healing that you receive by 5% while you're in Werebear form, and then all 3 ranks of Provocation, which makes it so every 20 seconds that you are in bear form, you get a guaranteed overpower. We never leave bear form in combat, so again, this is just essentially a free overpower once every 20 seconds. Then we head over to the Ultimate Node skill cluster, and of course we are going to be taking the Grizzly Rage skill. This transforms you into a dire werebear for the duration, and then we also take the enhancements for this over here, which makes the total effect be that you can only use bear skills while it's active, but that includes our earth skills thanks to the unique helmet. You are unstoppable for the duration, so again, another way to just ignore crowd control and debuffs entirely. You gain 8% base health as Fortify every second that this is active, and you get 20% damage reduction just as a baseline while this is going. You get bonus damage that increases every second that the ultimate is active, as well as the duration of it increasing by 1 second for any enemy that you kill while it's going. This is our big damage window. Pulverize is totally capable of one-shotting even outside of this, but the Grizzly Rage effects just compound upon it in incredible ways. Past this, we also take a number of passives here, 3 ranks of Defiance for 12% bonus damage with nature magic skills to elites. Pulverize counts as a nature skill in this build, so that's just 12% bonus damage to elites. Then we take 3 ranks of Natural Disaster for 12% increased earth skill damage to vulnerable enemies. Then also 3 ranks of Circle of Life for 3% maximum health, healed every time that you use a nature magic skill that costs spirit, in other words, Pulverize. After that, we spend our last point on the key passive, which is going to be Earthen Might. At this point, most of our synergies should be pretty clear to you, but of course it gets even better as we move on, so next up, let's check out our spirit boons. In the Deer Path, you of course want Wariness. This is just the best one in this row really, it gives you 10% damage reduction from elite enemies. In the Eagle Path, you want Avian Wrath for a bonus 30% crit damage. You could argue that the Crit Chance boon over here is good too, but we get enough crit chance from other places too that more crit damage is actually pretty solid here, because we have the guaranteed crits that proc with Earthen Might as well whenever that happens, and 30% crit damage is too much of it to ignore. In the Wolf Path, you want Calamity. This makes your ultimate skills last for 25% longer, which of course includes Grizzly Rage, and then you want to Spirit Bond with the Snake and take 2 boons down here. Calm Before the Storm you always want for this. It gives you a decent lucky hit hit chance with nature magic skills to reduce the cooldown of your ultimate by 2 seconds. And then the final choice here is a little bit selective. If you want purely offense, then Obsidian Slam is still the best choice, giving you a guaranteed overpower every 20 kills that you get. But the second you start needing some more survivability, you should swap this over to Masochistic, which heals you for 3% health every time you crit with a shapeshifting skill, which is every one of our damage skills here. Combined with our crit chance, that all just of course works out wonderfully.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
After that, let's move over to our gear itself, and this is where the rest of our major synergies come from. The most important one for our entire build is the aspect of the Earth Sign Horror. This is what turns Pulverize into an Earth skill, and no part of the build functions without it, really. It also leaves behind a little puddle of damage on the floor. After you use Pulverize, it does damage for a couple of seconds afterwards. The second most important one, and the one that you absolutely want on a two-handed weapon for double effectiveness, is the Shockwave aspect. This makes Pulverize basically fire off a projectile in a line in front of you that with a good roll can do up to 200% of the damage of Pulverize itself, which would be double the initial impact. On close targets, you can actually angle this in a way so they are hit both by the initial Pulverize and also the Shockwave, which is what makes the damage of this build as nasty as it is, but this means that you can deal tons of damage to loads of enemies, even if they are far away from you. Third up, we have the aspect of the Rampaging Werebeast. This increases the duration on Grisly Rage, which is good of course, but even more importantly, it gives you an effect where every time you get a crit during Grisly Rage, you gain 10% crit damage. This stacks upon itself, and then it'll stack and stack and stack the entire time that Grisly Rage is active, and that's a big part of how we hit these silly damage numbers, like nearly 2 million on a single enemy with just one input occasionally. Then we have the aspect of Retaliation, which I recommend putting on your amulets for a 50% bonus in its effectiveness. Doing that will give you up to a 60% damage boost on core skills, depending on how much Fortify you have. This build more often than not will hit 100% Fortify, and so this damage boost will be fully active. Then we should talk about our unique helm, which is Vasily's Prayer. This makes your earth skills count as werebear skills, and is what lets us essentially act the same during Grisly Rage as we do out of it, what makes the provocation passive work effectively as well. Past that, on your boots you want the aspect of Quicksand. This makes all earth skills apply a slow. It doesn't really matter what the roll is on this legendary, it just matters that you do have it, as this is what lets us activate the passive that gives earth skills tons of bonus damage on crowd controlled enemies. This makes every enemy that you hit crowd control, because all of our damage skills are technically earth skills outside of trample, I guess. After that, you want the aspect of Mending Stone. This makes Earthen Bulwark last for a total of 9 seconds, which is triple its base duration, as well as letting you restore some of the barrier every time you get a kill while it's active. The main function of this is the duration though, is again Earthen Bulwark makes you immune to crowd control, so having that be a 9-second effect instead of a 3-second one is fantastic. For your last 2 slots, then I have a couple of different options to present. One is a bit more offensive and one a bit more defensive. The offensive option is to have the Crackstone aspect on your gloves, which gives earth skills up to a 40% more critical damage against crowd controlled targets, then also the aspect of Might, which gives you 20% damage reduction for up to 6 seconds after hitting an enemy with a basic skill. More often than not, this will be active for you, unless you happen to get a lucky hit chain with Earthen Might, in which case survivability will absolutely not be an issue for you anyways, because anything on your screen is about to die. The alternate option for you here then is sort of funky, which is the unique item Temerity, which makes it so anytime you heal for effects that would put you past 100% health, you instead gain a barrier for the same amount, which can go up to 80% maximum health on a perfect roll. This is great for survivability and even lets you chug a potion while at max health for the barrier effect, which you actually would want to do occasionally because we pair this with the Conceited aspect, which gives you up to 25% bonus damage anytime that you have a barrier on. Of course, this also pairs with Earthen Bulwark, which is a barrier, but using Temerity means that we can have a 100% uptime on barriers and thus make this effect active 100% of the time as well. This technically overall makes you able to do more damage than the other version of the build, as it doesn't rely on the randomness of crits and it doesn't need you to have them crowd controlled, but it does make you notably less tanky as you lose some of your damage reduction, and you often will be using potions to proc more barriers for more damage, meaning that you have less potions to recover from incoming damage. As far as general gearing tips then, you absolutely without a doubt want a two-handed axe for this build. Two-handed weapon is mandatory in general because Shockwave is too strong to not double the power on, but an axe specifically has the primary affix of bonus damage to healthy enemies, and we are essentially using this build in general to one-shot anything small, and oftentimes even one-shot elites. On your gloves, you absolutely need to have bonus ranks to Pulverize. I spent so much money enchanting random pairs of gloves until they had this with decent other skills. Pulverize is our main source of damage, and every rank that you can gain to it increases its damage dramatically. More than anything else that you can stick in that slot for sure. Past that, you want a ton of willpower as this multiplies all of your damage by a notable amount, A bit of crit chance too is not a bad idea, but not too much, as we have the ability to guarantee crits if Earthen Might procs. You want a load of crit damage as well, some lucky hit chance to help proc Earthen Might even more often, a good chunk of damage reduction skills on your armor in general just for some more tankiness. Damage to vulnerable enemies is a top tier affix as well. Then past that, any bonus ranks to skills or passive that we use are good in general. General additive damage bonuses are good as well, and movement speed is fantastic if you can get that too. For your gems, I would recommend using skulls inside all of your jewelry for bonus armor. You should use rubies inside of your armor itself for bonus maximum life. Then in your weapon, you want a couple of emeralds, which will give you bonus critical damage to vulnerable enemies. At this point, you may be saying, oh, wait, we have all these things that affect vulnerable enemies, but we don't have any way of applying vulnerable, right? Well, with that, let's bust on into our Paragon board. On the starting board, you want to take the right path for bonus damage and head to the glyph socket in the middle of the board, in which I would generally recommend putting in the exploit glyph, at least for now. You may want to move it later on, depending on how the other boards are looking. You also want to make this your second priority as far as upgrading glyphs through Nightmare Dungeons, because if you reach 25 dexterity in the radius of this, it will activate the secondary effect, with the total effects of the glyph when that's active being bonus damage to vulnerable enemies, which will stack depending on how much dexterity is purchased within the area, but then the really solid secondary effect of making enemies vulnerable the first time you hit them every 20 seconds. As our goal is to basically one-shot things, our first hit would make enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds, and by the end of that 3 seconds, they should generally be dead outside of large bosses. After that, grab the nearby rare nodes and head up to the next board, for which we'll be taking the Ancestral Guidance board. This node gives you 30% bonus damage for 5 seconds every time you spend 75 spirit, and given that we use our core skill loads, this will be active quite often. So head over to that node first while stopping on the way for the rare node along the way, then circle around over to the top left and get to the glyph socket. Inside of this glyph socket, you're going to want to be putting the Werebear glyph. This is your main priority glyph for upgrading within the build. It gives you bonus damage in Werebear form for every 5 willpower purchased in the radius, as well as 10% damage reduction in Werebear form just permanently if you've activated it properly. Then head over to your third board on the right side, which should be Survival Instincts. This legendary node makes it so you deal more damage to enemies depending on the maximum health percentage difference between you. This mostly only affects our single target damage on bosses, as everything else will generally be dead before this has a major effect, but normally single target on big enemies is actually the weak point of this build, and this fixes it a hell of a lot. That said, make sure it is rotated like mine is, then head up the top path here for the rare node up in the corner, and then you want to wrap around into the legendary node itself. After that, take the right path again and come down into the glyph socket. And this one is important but doesn't really work until you have a glyph at level 15 for the slot for the expanded radius. That said, from this point there are 3 more glyphs I will recommend. The order isn't really set as for which one you want in which board, it's whichever one you get to 15 first, stick it in the remaining slot that makes the most use of it. Those glyphs are Earth and Sky. This boosts the effect of any rare nodes that are in the radius by 30%, with the additional effect of nature magic skills doing 10% bonus damage to crowd-controlled enemies if you reach the activation condition. The other 2 that you'll want on your board are the Spirit glyph over here. This increases your critical hit damage with core skills, which Pulverize of course counts as, and the additional effect gives a stacking debuff to enemies that makes them take more damage from you every time you get a critical hit on them, which again is fantastic for single target purposes, filling in the general whole of this build. Then for the final glyph, what you want is sort of dependent on your upgrade levels. You either want Territorial over here, which is a growing damage buff against close enemies, which a lot of our enemies are, and an additional effect for boosting damage reduction from close enemies too. The other one is Fang and Claw up here, which boosts your damage against close enemies in Werebear form by a set amount instead of the growing amount like Territorial, but then it also increases the effectiveness of rare nodes in the area. With that said, move on to your next board slot up at the top here, grabbing the rare node along the way to pick up even more damage against healthy enemies, and for your next board you want to pick Earthen Devastation. This makes Earth skills deal 30% bonus crit damage to crowd-controlled enemies, which obviously makes a lot of sense for this build, and it's obviously quite good for us. First up, head towards the glyph slot, which is sort of in the middle over here, and you also want to make sure that you activate the glyph that you put in there. Then you want to move to the left here and grab the rare node, which is 15% critical strike damage with Earth skills and extra willpower, as well as a bunch more critical strike damage with Earth skills if you reach that intelligence number, which you will eventually. It's just sort of how it is. After that, you want to wrap around to the legendary power so you can pick up Earthen Devastation, of course, and then other than that, you want to just take the left path here to reach the final board attachment gate, and here we're going to be taking the Constricting Tendrils board, which gives you lucky hit with nature magic skills up to a 15% chance to entangle an enemy hit with vines, which immobilizes them for 2 seconds and poisons them for 120% of the base damage dealt over 4 seconds. The actual legendary effect isn't really the important part of this, but that does stack pretty well with what we're doing anyways. So what you want to do with this board on the default rotation, because this is actually really good, coming in from the right side, you want to head down right over here to this bottom right rare node, plus 10% nature magic skill damage, and also plus 16% damage to elites. Obviously, that's important. More damage to elites is great. We already cream all the tiny little guys, so more elite damage, fantastic. Once you have this, grab all the little nodes around them, which just give you even more damage. It's not nothing to scoff at. Then you want to wrap back around to the middle to get Constricting Tendrils itself, because while it isn't perfectly fitting into our build, it is still a really nice upgrade to have that does fit generally in with what we're doing. After that, you want to continue pathing down the bottom over here until you reach the final glyph socket, fill in everything around it that you need, and then pretty much you're done. Your Paragon board is complete. As far as actually playing the build then, this one is quite easy. Press Earthen Bulwark more or less on cooldown, saving it to break crowd control if you know there is an elite nearby that can apply it. Press Debilitating Roar anytime that you have high damage coming in. Press Trample, mostly just as a crowd control break, but also as a movement tool or to stun enemies that are near walls. Press Grizzly Rage more or less on cooldown, and then use Pulverize whenever you have the spirit to do so. Otherwise, use Earth Spike. Job's a good one. For general tips then, again, Pulverize has a sweet spot where you can hit both the initial slam and the shockwave that comes out from the legendary on the same enemy, so you want to try to line that up as often as you possibly can. Also, the other big thing is you want to pull as large of a pack of enemies as possible in any given situation. If you can handle survivably pulling almost half of a dungeon in one go, you should, because it lets you proc Earthen Might easier, which lets you clear out that massive pack in a fraction of the time that it would take you to kill all of those same enemies, only 5 to 10 at a time. That's about it then, everyone. Everything that you could possibly want to know about the completed, perfected Papa Bear Pulverize Druid build. I hope you enjoyed this breakdown, and I look forward to seeing some of my bear brothers out there in the wild. Let us know what other Druid build archetypes that you'd like to see us take a stab at. I'm about at the point where I want to start messing around with the funkier stuff that's available, so tell us what you want to see, and maybe we will do it. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.